Have you considered that the individual you believed you knew harbored a history filled with unknown sacrifices? This memorial service transformed everything. The assembly at Cypress Grove Cemetery gathered somberly around the newly excavated burial site, their soft whispers drifting away in a mild wind. A collection of relatives, companions and casual connections had assembled to offer their final respects to Robert Henley, a person esteemed for his benevolent works and gentle influence within the neighborhood. The sleek ebony gravestone shimmered in the midday light, inscribed with the phrase, "A life of service and sacrifice." Within the grievers, an aged African-American woman was noticeable, though not intentionally. Her profound emerald attire draped gracefully around her frame, and her grey locks were arranged tidily under a modest hat. She held a lone crimson rose, her palms unwavering, but her gaze revealed a burden of feelings much more profound than those surrounding her. While others shared cordial remarks, few recognized her presence. She maintained her quiet, positioned at the perimeter of the gathering, her demeanor both authoritative and modest. It wasn't until the minister finished his concluding benediction that she moved ahead, unhurriedly making her path to the forefront. The sound of pebbles under her shoes was the only noise as the attendees separated to provide her passage. When she approached the burial plot, she hesitated, gazing down at the lustrous coffin. Then with immense tenderness, she positioned the rose atop it, and pivoted to confront the assembly. "My name is Hattie DeLay," she initiated, her tone unwavering and distinct. "I suspect few among you recognize me, but I knew Robert more intimately than anyone present." A wave of astonishment moved through the throng. Visages turned toward one another, foreheads creased, lips murmured in inquisitiveness. Who was this lady? How might she assert such a profound connection to the man they all presumed they knew so intimately? Hattie's look passed over the multitude of countenances, her demeanor composed yet unwavering. "Before today concludes, you'll comprehend why I'm here," she declared. "And you'll comprehend the Robert Henley most of you never recognized." Her statement lingered in the atmosphere, dense with an unspoken assurance. But what Hattie was preparing to divulge would leave everyone questioning all they believed they understood about the man they'd gathered to commemorate. The murmurings had diminished, abandoning only the stirring of foliage, as Hattie inhaled a profound breath. Her voice carried a serene authority, compelling everyone to listen. "I encountered Robert 50 years ago," she began, her stare remote as if the recollections were unfolding before her. "It wasn't here in this community. It was in Montgomery, Alabama, during an era when individuals like myself weren't embraced in locations like this." The assembly leaned slightly inward, interest flickering in their gaze. Hattie persisted, her voice imbued with both dignity and anguish. "Robert was merely a youthful man then, brimming with passion and aspiration. He served as an instructor, but his spirit was in the civil rights movement. That's where we intersected paths, on the steps of a sanctuary where we were coordinating demonstrations. He wasn't frightened to stand alongside me even when it signified forfeiting his employment, or confronting dangers." Inhalations of surprise rippled through the assembly. The Robert they had recognized was charitable and amiable, but none had ever heard of his participation in such struggles. Hattie permitted the gravity of her words to settle before continuing forward. "We weren't merely comrades in the battle for fairness," she stated, her voice mellowing. "We were companions, no more than companions. We evolved into each other's kin when the universe appeared determined to rip us asunder. He remained by me when I surrendered my sister to the brutality of those periods, and I remained by him when he needed to reconstruct his existence after being shunned by his own." Hattie's palm quivered slightly as she repositioned her hat, her stare affixed on the casket. "We exchanged meals, narratives, weeping. He referred to me as his sibling in every manner that mattered, even when it wasn't secure for him to articulate it out loud." The assembly shifted uncomfortably, the significance of her statements sinking in. It was challenging to align this portrayal of Robert with the individual they recognized, a refined philanthropist, who had silently aided numerous but never discussed his own conflicts. But she uttered, her voice growing more resolute, "What I'm revealing to you isn't merely about the history. It's about the person he transformed into because of those hardships." She paused, surveying the assembly, permitting the silence to expand just adequately. But what Hattie disclosed next would transcend their connection, drawing back the drape on sacrifices none of them could have envisioned. Hattie's fists clutched tightly around her handbag, her voice steadfast as she conversed. "And I didn't merely endure the era, we battled through them. But that battle demanded sacrifices that left imprints on both of us, imprints most of you would never perceive. She glanced at the assembly, her penetrating gaze meeting theirs as if challenging anyone to avert their eyes. In 1967, Robert forfeited his position for attending a demonstration in Selma. The educational administration termed it unbecoming conduct, but we all comprehended what it genuinely was: retribution. He didn't inform anyone here about it, because he didn't desire sympathy. He bundled up what meager possessions he possessed and relocated to a modest single-bedroom residence on the southern region of Montgomery. That's where he resided, scraping by on educational guidance tasks, never once abandoning the cause. Hattie's speech fractured slightly as she persisted. When my own dwelling was set ablaze in vengeance for hosting assemblies, it was Robert who appeared in the center of the night with his vehicle. He transported me and my 2 nephews to security without reluctance, acknowledging fully the peril. She reverted to the casket, her expression softening. That's who Robert was, not the polished gentleman in the custom-fitted suit most of you recall, but someone who traversed through flames for the individuals he cherished about. The assembly stood in silence, enthralled as she retrieved a folded piece of parchment from her handbag. This, she declared, elevating it, is a correspondence Robert composed to me in 1972. I desire to recite just one segment to you. Hattie unfolded the correspondence with caution, her hands quivering just enough to demonstrate how much it signified to her. She commenced reading aloud, her voice trembling but lucid. Hattie, you are the sibling I selected when existence provided me none. We have shared burdens no individual should carry, but I would bear them once more for you without inquiry. You remind me each day that affection is not about heritage. It's about who arrives when the world turns its back. Her voice shattered on the final phrase, and she halted to regain her poise. The assembly, previously so unyielding, now shifted visibly, some dabbing at their eyes, others gazing at the ground in disgrace for not understanding this aspect of the man they had gathered to honor. Robert never turned his back on anyone, Hattie declared, refolding the correspondence, not even when it cost him everything. And yet how many of you here understood any of this? How many of you cared enough to inquire? She allowed the inquiry to linger, the manner of her words pressing on the assembly like a dense mist. But as the reality of Robert's sacrifices penetrated, Hattie unveiled something even more profound, an act of valor that would redefine his heritage eternally. The atmosphere seemed weightier as Hattie proceeded, her words interwoven with both sorrow and defiance. There's one additional truth about Robert, a truth none of you would have speculated, yet it's one that molded everything he advocated for. The assembly tensed, hanging on her every utterance as she took a steadying breath. Robert didn't merely battle for others, he fought a conflict no one could observe. For years he concealed the truth that he was supporting a child, a son he couldn't openly assert because of who the mother was. A communal gasp rippled through the assembly. Hattie's gaze swept the stunned faces, but she advanced forward without pause. His son Samuel was born to a woman Robert couldn't wed, because of the era and location they resided in. The lad was black like me, and Robert was compelled to maintain it subdued for fear of what it would inflict on his profession, and standing in particular social circles. The murmurs grew more intense now, individuals exchanging glimpses of incredulity, but Hattie wasn't concluded. I was present when Samuel was born, she uttered softly, and Robert ensured that lad never went without. He financed his education, composed correspondences every week, and visited whenever he could under the concealment of darkness. He ensured Samuel possessed everything he never had growing up, a father's affection, even if it needed to be a quiet affection. Moisture welled in her eyes, but her voice remained powerful. And Samuel, the man you didn't realize existed, is here today. At that a tall gentleman stepped ahead from the rear of the assembly. His demeanor was commanding, with wide shoulders, and a tranquil dignity in the manner he moved. The similarity to Robert was unmistakable. The assembly rotated to stare, stunned into some silence. Samuel approached Hattie and gently positioned a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he uttered quietly, his voice thick with sentiment, "for everything." Hattie smiled at him through her tears. "It was always my honor." She reverted to the assembly, addressing them once more. Robert cherished. Everyone standing in his path became an obstacle, but his deepest affection was reserved for those he defended, we who weren't privileged enough to be acknowledged in respectable circles. That's the reason I'm standing here now. to ensure you understand the genuine person beneath all the recognition. The hush that ensued wasn't merely astonishment. It was contemplation, a confrontation with the verity that had been concealed yet visible all along. However, before the grieving attendees could fully digest what they'd discovered, Hattie had one last tale to impart, an instance of courage that would eternally define Robert's heritage. The assembly remained motionless, the significance of Hattie's statements settling upon them like an overwhelming shroud impossible to discard. The whispers that had previously filled the space were now gone, substituted by an overwhelming quietness. Every gaze was fixed on Samuel, who maintained a dignified and unwavering posture beside Hattie, his very existence a living confirmation of the confidences Robert had maintained. An elderly gentleman near the congregation's front cleared his throat, his voice disrupting the tranquility. "I never realized," he faltered. "Robert never mentioned anything about this." Hattie's expression gentled as she regarded him. "He wasn't someone who sought admiration for doing what was necessary," she explained. "But make no doubt, he carried the burden of these compromises each and every day." A woman in her middle years, her visage marked with teardrops, hesitantly stepped forward. "I recall him assisting my household when my father became unemployed," she stated softly. "I believed I comprehended his benevolence, but now it feels considerably more profound." Hattie acknowledged with a nod, her voice steady yet infused with sentiment. Robert didn't just give when convenient, he gave because he comprehended what it meant to be without, and he never wished for anyone to experience that identical suffering. The assembly began to shift, fragments of their own recollections of Robert rising to the surface. Each recounted story portrayed a man whose generosity and fortitude were grounded in a life few of them had genuinely understood. But it wasn't solely the memories that pervaded the atmosphere. It was the remorse. Many started to perceive they had only known the refined version of Robert, the individual who wore his accomplishments like protection to shield the reality of his struggles. A youthful man toward the back eventually spoke up, his voice quivering with emotion. "It's unjust," he declared, his hands tightening into fists. "He deserved celebration for everything, not merely the aspects we wanted to acknowledge." Hattie turned toward him, her expression softening. "You're correct," she affirmed. But Robert wasn't someone concerned with recognition. He cared about influence, and his greatest inheritance isn't the plaques on walls or accolades in your programs. It's the lives he affected, yours, mine, and Samuel's. Samuel stepped forward then, his voice low but resolute. "My father consistently told me that a person's measure isn't what physical items they leave behind. It's what they leave within people. And standing here today, I observe that he left behind more than I ever envisioned." The assembly seemed to inhale collectively, their shared guilt yielding to a deeper comprehension of the man they had gathered to mourn. Tears flowed freely now, not solely for Robert's death, but for the profound realization of his unseen sacrifices. But as the crowd began to grasp the complete significance of Robert's existence, Hattie prepared to share one final account, a moment that would leave them forever transformed. Hattie took a moment to compose herself, her hands firmly clasped together as she looked out at the gathering. The atmosphere was dense, not with grief alone, but with newfound respect for the man they believed they had known. Yet there remained one more story she needed to share, a final deed of Robert's life that would characterize his legacy. 2 months before Robert departed, she began, her voice more gentle now. "He contacted me. He wasn't healthy, but his resolve hadn't diminished. He informed me he was establishing a trust not for himself or his estate, but for the children in this community, children whose parents struggle financially, children who merit opportunities, but are frequently overlooked." The crowd stirred again, their expressions a mixture of amazement and reverence. He understood he wouldn't survive to witness the trust in operation. Hattie continued, her voice slightly breaking. But he wasn't concerned about that. What mattered to him was initiating the endeavor, ensuring it would flourish long after his departure. Samuel stepped forward, his deep voice complementing his mother's words. "That trust is authentic," he stated firmly. "It's already been founded, and will provide scholarships, after-school programs, and mentorship for children in need. My father wanted his existence to have significance, not just to individuals he knew, but to generations that would follow him." Hattie surveyed the area, her gaze connecting with each mourner's eyes. "That was Robert's greatest bequest," she said. "He didn't require acknowledgement or applause. He just needed to know he had contributed his part to making the world slightly better." A prolonged silence followed, the impact of her words settling into everyone present's hearts. Some nodded silently, others wiped away tears, and a few simply remained motionless, absorbed in thought. Hattie placed her hand on the glossy headstone, her voice growing softer, but no less determined. So now I leave you with this question. How will you be remembered? Not for possessions or titles earned, but for the lives you touched, and the love you bestowed. She turned back to the crowd, her expression kind but firm. If Robert taught us anything, it's that true legacy isn't engraved in stone. It's written in the hearts of the people you elevate. The crowd seemed to exhale collectively, the emotional weight giving way to quiet reflection. Hattie gave a final nod to Samuel, before stepping back, allowing the moment to settle. As the mourners began to disperse, many approached Hattie and Samuel, offering words of gratitude and promises to honor Robert's legacy. The cemetery, once a place of solemn finality, had transformed into a space of renewed purpose. If this narrative moved you, let it serve as a reminder that kindness and sacrifice often remain unseen, but never go unnoticed. Remember Robert's lesson: live a life that creates lasting impact on others. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us continue sharing stories like this one.